Prediction is the holy grail for driving any kind of decision, right? Any place where you might want to pounce on a potential positive opportunity or take moves to avert or dodge a potential negative outcome, whether it's a healthcare clinical outcome or a business outcome, it all comes down to prediction, right? Now, prediction, the only thing certain is uncertainty. It's very hard to predict the weather so many days ahead. Human behavior, no less audacious to predict, but you put credibility on this whole field that has the audacity to call itself predictive analytics by understanding that you don't have to predict like a magic crystal ball. That's what makes it credible. Predicting better than guessing and putting odds on all of these operations so that over time it really pays off. That's the pay dirt.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators podcast. I'm Seth Dechtman, your Keynote Curator. I'm very excited to have our new guest, Eric Siegel. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Seth. It's great to be here.
Eric, where does this podcast find you today?
I'm in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. It's sunny but cold.
Lovely Marin County.
Yeah.
Always nice any time of year, no?
We love it. Yeah, I grew up in a small town, so I was in large cities until 2 years ago, and now I'm excited to be in a small town, basically.
That's a John Mellencamp song. I was born in a small town. All right.
That's right. He wrote that song about me, actually.
Yeah. The musical portion of this is a little bit later in the podcast. I'm excited about having you today because you are deeply immersed, involved, and just all things artificial intelligence, which is what is on everybody's mind today. Dr. Eric Siegel is a predictive analytics and AI expert, founder of the long-running Machine Learning Week conference series, and a former professor at Columbia University, where he won the Distinguished Faculty Award for teaching graduate computer science courses in machine learning and AI. He's the best-selling author of 2 books. His first, Predictive Analytics, The Power to Predict Who Will Click, Buy, Lie, or Die, explained how machine learning works and has been used in courses at hundreds of universities. His latest book explains how to capitalize on and master the rare art of machine learning deployment. Eric, we've been talking about artificial intelligence, but we haven't had somebody so close to the bone. I don't know if we can use that term with regard to AI because there's no bones in the machine, but our listeners are, as you may know, mostly event professionals, everybody who's involved in the event conference, the event planning, the event marketing ecosystem. And as you know, they are also deploying, using, executing, learning, cutting their teeth, figuring out ways to use the tool of artificial intelligence in their workflows, how to optimize and make more efficient planning and execution, communication, their research, engaging with clients. So welcome. And I just want to start in the deep end, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Your latest book, The AI Playbook, Mastering the Rare Art of Machine Learning Deployment. Just bring us into that whole world. What is machine learning and how does it relate to AI?
Sure. So machine learning is technology that learns from data to predict in order to better target large-scale operations. So to whom should we market? Which transactions should we audit for fraud? Which credit application should we approve? Which credit card transaction should we audit for fraud? Which insurance application should we approve? Which insurance claim should we approve or fast track? All the large scale operations, digital or otherwise, that make the world go round. All the main operations of businesses stand to be improved by prediction. Prediction's the holy grail. The data that you're learning from is an encoding of experience. It records an organization's collective experience as far as which individual has clicked, buy, lied, or died, as in the title of my first book. In order to learn from that historical experience, that's the data, make a model, deploy it so that those predictions now improve operations. Now, You asked how machine learning relates to AI. So AI is actually a very ill-defined term, kind of like big data and analytics, doesn't necessarily refer to any particular technology or value proposition, but rather kind of alludes to a culture of smart people trying to do smart things with data. The problem with the term AI is it involves the word intelligence, very subjective, nothing if not related to humans, or if you're talking about a machine, you're anthropomorphizing it. So it sort of alludes to, hey, let's try to get to the point of science fiction. It conveys a lot of hype. Now, today, when people say AI, they're mostly talking about generative AI. So everything I just described about learning from data to predict, you could call that predictive AI or predictive analytics, which is basically a synonym for enterprise machine learning use cases, which it stands in contrast to generative AI, where the core technology is still machine learning. So you're still using the machine to learn from data to predict, but what you're predicting is what should the next word be when you're writing a sentence, or how should I change this pixel as I'm rendering a new image. So at the core, it's the same technology, but used in a very different way over learning from an even larger amount of data, even more complex, advanced modeling methods or analytical methods. And so in the end, they're kind of apples and oranges. Generative AI, obviously, large language models like ChatGPT, the capability for the machine to sound somewhat human like and even sometimes be correct, definitely providing draft writing that can be very valuable for certain enterprise applications and use cases. And yet at the same time, bringing with it a lot of mainstream hype and perhaps bad expectation management about where this is headed and how human level or human like in terms of ultimate capabilities we're going to get the machines to be. So to summarize, predictive AI, that's where we have established use cases. That's where you improve all the large scale operations that exist within enterprises. Generative AI, it's a new tool. It's still finding its footing. It's not being used as much, but does have a lot of potential value, and especially when you're willing to manually audit it. You have to have a human in the loop checking out the draft writing it does each time. It's not going to be autonomous in that sense anytime soon, but it could be extremely valuable.
And when you say there's a human auditing it, is not only looking at the result of what's generated, but even the prompts themselves?
Well, yes, I was alluding to like whatever it generates, you can't just trust it. You don't
Okay.
know if it kind of constructed things that don't exist. But yes, in terms of exactly how to use it, that's another place where we're still finding our footing because there's this sort of craft of everyone refers to it as prompt engineering. And same for also generating images. So yeah, you need this sort of very hands-on case by case interaction by a human. Whereas with predictive AI and all of these established enterprise use cases, there's very much the potential for autonomy in a lot of those use cases. So, for example, when you use your credit card, it automatically decides on the fly whether to authorize that transaction or whether to hold it as potentially fraudulent. That's done instantly without a human in the loop making that particular decision. If you have a million prospects to whom you might be marketing and you want to target direct marketing, direct mail, or what have you, the machine will autonomously make a million yes no decisions to decide exactly who should be included in that marketing campaign. So there are places with predictive AI where it's autonomous and there's not nearly as much room when you're trying to do the kinds of things you do with generative AI, because now you're really entering the realm of
Right.
human behavior and you need to have, it can be wrong. It's
Yeah.
optimized to sound human like, but the core language models are not designed to be correct, even though they do
Right.
turn out to be correct quite often.
So help me understand a little bit more the predictive piece, and then there's the generative or misnamed AI, which anthropomorphizes it, or
Mhm.
gives it a kind of a false sense of what it really is. On the predictive side, the example you used with the credit card, and that could be automated to a certain level. And then on the generative side, using it as a tool, my question, or what I'd like our audience to understand, is both at some level require human interaction because they are ultimately a tool. I'm no computer scientist and I haven't taken your course. The computer only does to a point what you tell it to do, even if it is predictive. So, in that sense, there is an art. I guess I'm making the case. There's an art to it using the tool, because is it the hammer or is it the carpenter? And help us understand that a little bit in kind of for in layman's terms, for those of us that want to understand in a big sense of what's going on with AI and predictive analytics, and then how we might be able to understand the context of relating to it, using it as a tool. And I don't know if that question makes any sense at all, or I'm just trying to sound smarter than what I really am.
No, you do sound a lot smarter than you really are. No,
I
no, that's
fooled
a great
them.
it's a great it's a great question. No, I mean, you need to be very hands-on about the way, in many cases, there's a human in the loop at each step, even with predictive AI. Either way, you have to be very careful as an organization and as personnel at the organization, whether you're a data scientist or on the business side of a machine learning project, in positioning exactly how the technology is going to help. Because again, if it's going to improve some large scale operation in marketing, fraud detection, credit, risk management, whatever it is at your organization, the behavior website, just choosing which ad to display, whatever it is, if it's going to be making those decisions and improving that operation, that means a change to operations. And it turns out that there's a lot of really well intentioned machine learning projects, perhaps the majority of new machine learning projects, that actually fail to get to that point of deployment. And that's what my new book is about, the AI Playbook, which is when you want to make a change to operations, that's a big project as far as operational change. It's not just a number crunching project. So although people conceive of it as this is a machine learning project, we should probably reframe it as this is an operations improvement project that happens to use machine learning. And that would help address the dilemma and the problem, which is that there's this kind of disconnect. People don't focus on and prepare enough for what that deployment will entail, the actual integration of the predictions into
Right.
operations so that it actually changes and therefore improves operations. You have to be prepared to change those operations in some way, in a way that's informed by predictions, which basically come down to probabilities. So the thing doesn't predict like a magic crystal ball, but it predicts a lot better than guessing. And that turns out to be valuable. I call that the prediction effect. A little prediction goes a long way. If you're trying to predict something like who will click, buy, lie, or die, commit an act of fraud, cancel as a subscriber, any of these kinds of outcomes or behavior could be valuable. And that's what makes for a use case. What are you predicting? And then what are you doing about it? It's the doing about it part where people often get stuck. But in any case, if you're trying to predict any one of those things, a lot of them come down to what a human, an organization, or some element like a satellite that might run out of a battery. And you can't predict like a magic crystal ball, but you can predict a lot better than guessing. So a little prediction goes a long way in terms of the value if you act on it. And that's the deployment piece. So actually getting it integrated, there's a lot of well-meaning projects that don't get there because they haven't planned from the get-go. And that's what my new book is about, the AI Playbook. It's accessible to business readers, and it provides what's meant to be an industry standard playbook, a practice, a 6-step practice, so that you plan it in reverse from the inception of the project, how it's going to deploy, and have everyone across the 6-step project, both the business and data science side, so that people can sort of wrap their head around what this thing's going to do when you deploy it, and it actually gets greenlit and integrated and deployed successfully by the end of the project.
Yeah, I'm listening and I'm thinking, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are, who aren't only meeting professionals. We have business owners, we have entrepreneurs, people coming for great insights that you're delivering right now. There's the concept, the academic idea, the plan, if you will, the game plan. And then there's actually the court where it plays out, where it's deployed, which is such a great word. Do you find that, I'm going to give you another long-winded question here. Do you find that there are a lot of adjustments made from the predictive model, and then when you deploy it, that there have to be adjustments from the concept to the actual execution of it? And thinking of that answer in the world of conferences, you've run your own conference yourself. You've attended and spoken at very big conferences all over the place. Attendees have habits. You can predict. You can use the data to get a sense of what is going to best serve their experience there, their education, how they're going to network with attendees, what sessions might be most appealing to them based on their previous behavior, or even their most recent behavior, if there's an app that is throwing and tracking their movements and their data and their engagement at the event. How do you see that playing out? I know there was like 3 or 4 little questions or observations in there.
Well, you're right that the thing can fail, but it doesn't technically fail very often. The fact is, data is I call this the data effect. Data is predictive. When you put these things aside one another, what you knew at the time and then what turned out to happen later, the outcome or behavior. So you knew that this person lived in this area, had made these transactions, and then later did cancel as a subscriber. That's called churn modeling. You're predicting who's going to cancel in order to target retention offers. Whatever it is, it turns out data is predictive. There are correlations, links in the data that serve as building blocks for a predictive model that machine learning compiles together to best predict. Now, again, it's not going to predict like a magic crystal ball, but it's going to tip the odds. So it pans out. You can sleep well at night knowing that the data and the analytics are sound. The question is, are you going to make an organizationally sound decision, understanding that the model predicts a lot better than guessing? Any of these large scale operations, I mean, business is a numbers game. If you have too many people to market to, you're not going to spend the cost of contact for all of them. You're going to find some way to whittle down the list. This is the way to apply science to do that as effectively as possible. Same thing with fraud detection. You've got so many transactions, whether they're credit card payment charges or anything, so many transactions. How many of them is your human team of auditors going to manually audit? Or how many of them are you going to block instantly and therefore possibly inconvenience the person trying to attempt the transaction, which might be legitimate? You need to fine tune these knobs in terms of exactly how you're using the model, how you're deploying it, and making changes to operations with an eye on the specific numbers, the metrics that say, this is how much better than guessing it predicts. This is how much profit or cost savings should be delivered by deploying it in this way. So you mentioned for running events, and yes, I've been running events. Our event's called Machine Learning Week, previously Predictive Analytics World. We've been running it since 2009. It'll be in Phoenix, Arizona, June 4th to 7th, 2024. And alongside a new sister conference we're launching called Generative AI World. So Machine Learning Week is basically the predictive AI. Generative AI World is the generative AI. Now, we've had sessions on other conferences that use machine learning to target, as you just mentioned, recommendations. What sessions might you want to go to? Oracle, who also run their own analytics conferences, presented on their internal analytics at our conference as how they were doing exactly that. So recommending conference sessions to their event. IBM was running small sales-oriented events, and they actually had me speak at about 12 of them. And they used machine learning to target where and when they should plan events by predicting what the outcome. In their cases, the events were free. It's about butts in seats. And I'm quoting IBM in that phrase. Well, maybe they didn't say that publicly or anything, but they want to get as many butts in seats. I'll double down on that as possible, but they don't want to hold an event where no one's going to show up because it's sales oriented. I would say, though, that the first and main use case for conferences is in targeting marketing, which applies for any organization or any enterprise. That's one of the main places that machine learning is applied.
Dr. Siegel, predictive analytics, as you enumerated, is utilized all industries across the board. You talk about large scale. And as you know, our listeners operate large conferences. Share with us some of the obvious and not so obvious areas that this work could be utilized in executing and delivering rich, really sought after conferences for attendees.
Well, there's a few places that I've very much seen machine learning applied for the events industry. And in fact, other events have presented on this at my machine learning conferences about how they use machine learning to run their events. So one is session recommendations. So in general, a lot of people have heard about product recommendations. Amazon recommends which books you should buy and other products, Netflix, which movie to watch, these kinds of things. And conferences can say, hey, look, based on your profile and what sessions you've gone to, we predict and would recommend that you would find value in this session and that session. So Oracle, which runs analytics conferences itself, and database conferences, presented at our conference at how they did that. They used machine learning to offer recommended sessions to their event attendees. Another place that we see machine learning applied is that IBM uses machine learning to target where and when they should hold relatively small sales oriented events. So they're trying to decide, hey, which city and date should I plan an event with hopes that there'll be as many attendees as possible in the room. It's a free event to attend, but it's sales oriented for IBM's purposes. IBM presented at our machine learning event about how they use machine learning to drive those decisions about how to run their analytics sales oriented events. So there we have analytics, kind of selling itself. And then finally, more generally, just targeting of marketing, which applies for any industry and any kind of organization or company, and is a very prevalent way for using machine learning, which is to simply target marketing. So for example, for direct mail, you can multiply the returns many times over in comparison to doing mass mail to everyone on your prospect list by predictively targeting which people are actually worth expending the cost of contact. So that's one of the main foundational business use cases and very much applies for the event industry as much as any other.
It just continues to reduce the guesswork all
Yeah,
along the
exactly.
all
Yeah,
along the
sort
way.
of like still a needle in a haystack, but it's a much smaller haystack.
Right. And the needle might be a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
I do want to move on, but before we do, I have two things that I want to address. I just is crossing my mind the stock market and you utilizing these predictive analytics. What is your view on that? What is your conversation around that? I'm not the first person to think of that.
That's one of the hardest things. So black box trading, trying to predict, which assets are going to increase or decrease in value to drive buying and selling and holding decisions. It's very much an undercover area. People don't usually disclose exactly how they're doing it. The presumption is that it's got to be continuously changing, but it's much more challenging than the other kinds of business use cases
Yeah.
that I've been describing to actually drive a profit and to have predictability to it. However, in my first book, Predictive Analytics, the first chapter one, describes my colleague who actually invested all of his own savings early in his career when they hadn't amounted to so much yet, but all of his own savings to a stock market black box trading system of his own design. And it did go
Mm,
very well. He had a pretty amazing method. But what you're up against, a lot of other machines and humans doing their best to sort of outwit you. Whereas with the other kinds of use cases I'm describing, it's all about triaging or prioritizing. In fact, Google search and other search engines prioritize with a predictive model. The order of your Airbnb search results are ordered. Literal medical triage are ordered by the predictions of a predictive model generated with machine learning. So, and it turns out really you could look at all of these different use cases as analogous to that. They're all about ordering, prioritizing, triaging. Which of these sales leads are worth spending time on? Which of these marketing leads,
mm,
which of these
right.
transactions are worth auditing for fraud? It's all about using your time better. And the math works out great in terms of tipping the odds and delivering a dramatic improvement on the bottom line business metrics, and how well you're doing with this operation, especially in comparison with pure guesswork. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's why, everyone called it big data a few years ago. The big in big data isn't just how big it is, but how much value there is in data. Data is predictive.
And whether you're huge, like you named IBM, or a smaller operation, resources are so valuable that to be able to optimize them is just, is the gold. That's the key to it all. One last thing, I'm sure that this is used in sports as well. I am scouting an opponent in tennis. I determine based on my human analytics that chipping and charging on their second serve is going to yield the kind of pressure and the opportunities for me to close points out a little bit quicker. I try it 4 times last week in the first set, and I do not win any of those points. We go to the tiebreak, and my opponent double faults. And listening to our conversation right now, I'm recalling that. And I'm wondering if the added pressure of me coming in on their second serve had a result for them to feel the pressure and then double fault, but where would that be swept up in any type of analytic?
Well, just based on a handful of cases, right? You don't necessarily have some statistically significant insight, right? You need a lot of evidence in order to do this kind of number crunching. It does apply to sports, but usually over a large number of games
Right.
or matches in the case of tennis. So, I mean, one of the most famous examples is the book and movie Moneyball, which is about the Oakland A's that use a data-driven approach to decide which kind of players they needed and how to deploy those players. But broadly speaking, it's very much the same thing. You're driving operational decisions based on predicted outcome. I mean, prediction is the holy grail for driving any kind of decision, right? Any place where you might want to pounce on a potential positive opportunity or take moves to avert or dodge a potential negative outcome, whether it's a healthcare clinical outcome or a business outcome, right? It all comes down to prediction, right? Now, prediction, the only thing certain is uncertainty. It's very hard to predict the weather so many days ahead. Human behavior, no less audacious to predict. But you put credibility on this whole field that has the audacity to call itself predictive analytics by understanding that you don't have to predict like a magic crystal ball. That's what makes it credible. Predicting better than guessing and putting odds on all these operations so that over time it really pays off. That's the pay dirt.
I want to shift gears a little bit and go into the world of education and the future of work, future workforce. This whole conversation, it's just so obvious about how innovation can be accelerated. What do you think schools should be looking at when they're approaching the use and deploying AI or these predictive analytics? And where is that related to the workforce and where our educational system needs to be doing better, keeping up, or where we're falling behind? It's a big question, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No, I'm glad you asked. You actually just prompted me for a soapbox. And the theme of my new book, the AI Playbook, which is
Cue the
called
music, everybody.
Yeah, here we go. Let's listen carefully to the subtitle of my new book, the AI Playbook, Mastering the Rare Art of Machine Learning Deployment. And the reason it's rare to get it deployed is because of this disconnect between the tech and business, the data scientists and their business stakeholder, their manager, the head of operations that's meant to be improved by machine learning. So what's going wrong? They can't bridge this gap and speak the same language because the business stakeholders haven't gotten some concrete semi-technical knowledge. My book doesn't just outline the playbook to get you to deployment, but it actually ramps up the business reader on that semi-technical knowledge. And that semi-technical knowledge is not prevalent. There's no standard MBA course, but there very much should be. I actually just recently spent a year as an analytics professor at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. And this is what I've been working on. One main product of that year is the book, the AI Playbook. But here's what you need to learn. It's not the rocket science. It's how to use the rocket science, but it's semi-technical. What are you predicting? How well? And what do you do about it? So what are you predicting? What do you do about it? So who's going to cancel? Let's offer them a retention offer. Which transaction is likely to be fraudulent? Let's audit it for potential fraud. That pair of what do you predict and what do you do about it? That defines the use case. That's the business value proposition. And those are two of the three items. The other is how well is being predicted. All three of them take more than an hour keynote really to ramp up on so you can participate. It's probably a book's worth or a course's worth.
Right.
That's why I worked hard to make a book that delivers this in a palatable way for business readers. I think in an entertaining way that involves case studies from FICO, UPS, and others. It's basically kind of like a standard high school algebra in terms of the level of difficulty, except it's much more interesting because it's totally salient and relevant to what you're trying to do as an organization. So it's really fascinating, but you can't just say, okay, I'm going to predict who's canceling their subscription in order to target retention offer. You do have to get a lot more precise and specific about that. So in all three of these things, what's predicted, how well, and what's done about it, you have to dig into some concrete semi-technical detail about exactly what you're predicting, exactly how those predictions, those probabilities, the predictive scores output by machine learning are going to be integrated mechanically and actually change operations, changing business as usual. And then this idea of what are the metrics? People talk about accuracy, and it's almost always the wrong metric, impertinent, and actually quite misleading as far as the ability to predict and how well is it predict. So how do you put a number on how well it predicts if it's not predicting like a magic crystal ball? It's not highly confident for all cases, and yet still really valuable. That's a chapter's worth of material. It's arithmetic, but it's very particular arithmetic. What's predicted, how well, and what's done about it. So those three things are off the radar of your average business stakeholder, but must be central.
The connective tissue between the business operator, that person, that stakeholder, and the scientist or the engineer or the technologist, and where the overlap, where that Venn diagram of
Exactly.
one seeping in and steeping into the world of the other, and likewise, that's where that magic happens in the weaving into
That's
that
the
fabric.
Venn diagram. And it looks like this right now. And all we have to do is move it a little bit so they overlap a little. And that's it. This is the visual. Thank you for that. I'm going to start doing this.
Please. I mean, this is your whole speech right here. However, me and algebra in high school, I'm going to need the study guide. So when you send me the book, could you include the study guide with that? Because
there's a one-page cheat sheet at the end of the book. So
okay, great. That's right up my alley. Single-sided?
Single-sided. It literally says, rip this out of the book and hang it above your desk. That's what the book says. So
that's great. We're going to shift gears again, Dr. Siegel. Besides being a best-selling author, you also publish op-eds on analytics and social justice. In one of your videos, you quoted Spider-Man's uncle saying, quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." This is a multifaceted question, Eric. How do organizations use machine learning responsibly? Sustainability is a hot topic in our industry. What role does AI play in addressing global challenges such as climate change, poverty reduction, and can AI help bring our environment back into balance? Let's just start with that.
Yeah, AI, machine learning can be used for good, both for social justice and climate. And there's also ethical concerns, responsible use concerns. So we have those two things we want to do. We want to avoid using it in a bad way, and we also want to explicitly use it in a good way. So I'll address the first of those two. You referred to my op-eds. So yeah, I've been writing a lot about this for the San Francisco Chronicle, Scientific American blog, and a bunch of others. If you go to civilrightsdata.com, that'll get to my list of op-eds for anyone interested. Spider-Man's uncle, with great power comes great responsibility. I think he was kind of paraphrasing Voltaire, but I just rather just quote Spider-Man. And here's the deal. The power of prediction is that it's going to potentially be systematically driving large-scale operations in a much more effective way that improves bottom line profit for organizations. They're prone and inclined to use it if they can get their act together and bridge that gap we were just talking about so that the business and tech side can work together. And they often do. But when you go to deploy it, you're driving consequential decisions, right? So you're not just number crunching and doing this sort of abstract math in a cubicle. You're actually governing, because the model that makes predictions, which in turn directly inform or drive consequential decisions about whether you get a loan, housing, and even in law enforcement applications, how long you stay in prison for parole, driving parole decisions and sentencing decisions. Very consequential decisions.
Impacting lives.
Yeah. So one of the main places where you want to look at, and again, this thing is not going to be like a magic crystal ball. It will make errors. It will drive injustices. It'll be the determining factor in somebody staying in prison who arguably should not. Of course, that's already being done right now by humans. So the whole idea is now we're going to perform those injustices less often. And the reverse of letting someone go who should arguably stay in prison will be, that mistake will be done less often. But the question is, how are those mistakes allocated by protected classes like race and ethnicity? And that's where you start wondering whether there's, quote, bias in the models. And it turns out that for these models, because we live in a world that is the result of decades and centuries of racially biased behavior, and different populations are in different situations, that manifests in terms of prevalence of outcomes and behaviors. And it turns out, for example, there's one crime predicting model that's in deployment now, a famous ProPublica piece called Machine Bias, which everybody cites when they're talking about this, showed that there was a twice as high a false positive rate for Black convicts being predicted as far as whether they would recidivate. Will they be convicted for a crime upon release? So false positive, as in twice as often for Black versus white convicts, does the model put a high risk and therefore potentially encourage a longer time in jail or prison than for a white convict. That's an issue. How do you now? There's a way in which this could all turn out to sort of be good news, because now that we've done the number crunching and we're seeing that result under the stark light of day, we've put a spotlight on it. We've made it explicit. We see what that injustice is and how our circumstances in society are manifesting today. Now we say, oh, we've quantified the injustice and we're in a position to do about it to the degree these models are intended to be used, that we have the infrastructure and system where the predictions are going to now inform decisions and operations. Now we have the potential to actually intentionally enact for justice, to adjust the performance of those models in a way that actually helps even out where there are those false positive rates, for example. So machine bias, that's one of the main places people need to look at for responsible machine learning. Another is just explicitly discriminatory models. You can look at civilrightsdata.com, just find my article about that. That's in San Francisco Chronicle, where the model actually is making explicit decisions based on the protected class, such as the race. It's not very common, but there are proponents of that. So I'm arguing very much against it. So to answer the other half of your question about using machine learning for good, there's lots of places where you predict where there might be the worst egregious cases of housing discrimination, things like that. So you're again predicting something bad in order to try to avert it or anticipate it. As far as climate, we actually run a sister conference to Machine Learning Week called Predictive Analytics World for Climate. And it explores all the different ways climate technology can use machine learning. For example, predicting the amount of carbon captured by reforestation and by regenerative agricultural projects, predicting supply and demand for renewable energy and storage, predicting extreme weather risks to certain real estate areas and to crops. So all of these kinds of uses of machine learning, that general applicability of machine learning, where a use case is what's predicted and what's done about it, very much applies. That generality very much extends into the realm of climate technology.
It's so powerful, the recidivism and the study on, was it double likely positive, was incorrectly predicted.
Double the false positive.
Double the false positive. Thank you.
Yeah.
And implicitly in there is the human that is creating these models. That what you're saying is that bias, whilst it's woven into the model and the prediction is creating a result that is then having an unfavorable outcome or an unjust outcome. On the other side of the coin, what you're saying is that is unconcealed. It's revealed, if you will, and then you can be aware of it and do something about it.
Exactly. So I think that we have actually a great opportunity.
With regard to, there's more and more power in the hands of technologists, engineers, people on the side of these programs, software, these models that are being created that have such a strong impact on society. Getting personal here, in the social issues that are near and dear to you, how do you think about the best use of some of these models? For example, one example, I don't know if it's near and dear to you, but labor displacement, which is a big issue worldwide when people talk about, AI or technology disrupting the workforce.
Right. So I think, again, I'll address your question in terms of sort of the two sides, trying to avoid doing something bad and trying to intentionally do something good with machine learning. On the latter, doing something good, there's so much great work being done by NGOs to feed the world and improve against injustice. And one of the growing areas of machine learning deployment is to actually target where those resources are best used. So,
Right.
for example, which initiatives on the ground across the globe are going to potentially have the best outcome? Because there are plenty of failed initiatives. It's hard to make change. It's hard to improve justice and improve situations and decrease poverty and access to fresh water. Across all these potential initiatives, which ones should be greenlit? Where do you want to channel those resources? Similarly, we had a client project where they were giving grants and scholarships for college to underserved high school students, and they needed to decide who should they give it to and who should they make outreach to, who would be most interested, who's going to complete the long application process, and they needed to again channel their efforts most effectively. So they're literally targeting not customers that they want to make money from, but rather individuals that could use help who are most likely to be receiving of that help. So again, a targeting of resources. As far as labor displacement, that's an economics thing. And it's very much true that technology of all kinds is going to displace, and including what people refer to as AI, machine learning applications, generative AI. But I don't think it's going to be nearly as fast and dramatic as today's hype about AI is saying. I think that, as you make the world run more effectively, and more efficiently, that's part of our economy and generally is helping improve the life of most people. Everyone's
Right.
sort of quality of life is generally improving, even if there's greater disparity, class disparity, still the overall average are improving by a lot of metrics. So there's going to be adjustments where certain jobs kind of get displaced.
Transformed.
Yeah. But I do not think that that's going to be happening at a dramatic pace that's unforeseen. I do not
Right.
think it's going to be any different than what we've been doing for hundreds of years at this point.
Yeah. That is a common thread. Technology from the beginning of time all the way through has had that type of impact. Eric, we're almost out of time, but I want to shift gears for one last part of our final segment that we do with all of our guests. It's called 20
Mm.
questions. It's not literally 20 questions, but it's in the spirit of 20 questions. It's rapid fire responses, as short and quick as you can. Are
Okay.
you ready?
Absolutely.
What's the most exciting, interesting, unique, unknown thing about you that we wouldn't learn after having read your resume?
Did you know I made a rap music video about predictive analytics?
I did not know that. Listeners, we have to pull that up and we have to weave it into this podcast.
This is the most educational 3.5 minutes you'll have of your entire life, and proof that I'll do anything to educate the world about predictive analytics. Please do not get too distracted by the very campy, nerdy video. Pay attention to the lyrics. They're legitimately educational. Just
They're
three and a
legit.
half minutes. They're super legit, and I use all the lingo. And it's just 3.5 minutes long. So go to predict this. It's called Predict This, and you go to
Man.
predictthis.org.
I've worked with Will.i.am, who is very involved in
Oh, really?
educating and
Yeah.
bringing technology to not only underserved communities, but back in where he came from, and just really some interesting stuff. It might be a reprise where you could do like an extended, updated version, and
I've
bring
got
it.
a couple more that haven't been laid out yet. We're working on this, and I've been wanting to collaborate with Will.i.am, so I would appreciate the hookup. I'll definitely want
I
to
mean, there
collaborate
might
with
be an opening here, Eric.
you.
All
Okay, I'm
righty.
ready. I'm ready.
Moving on. Ice cream, chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
What's the last thing you've seen streaming or movie or anything on a screen?
I watched the new Mission Impossible. I had to see Tom Cruise take that jump that I'd seen on YouTube a million times, and I watched it with my father. And the action sequences in that movie really were surprisingly good. I've gotten really tired of the last third of action movies. You know
All
what?
right.
I didn't feel that way at all.
Great. Pizza, plain or with a topping?
If there's no topping, what's the point?
Ah, this is a good insight. This is a
Yeah,
good insight to
absolutely.
understanding Dr. Eric Siegel.
Exactly.
If you have a bucket list and you have travel on your bucket list, what would be the next place that you would go to?
Back to Bali. Does that how can it be if it's yeah, how can you have something on your bucket list that you've already done? Well, I do. It's bad. My wife and I want to go back to Bali. I've had the pleasure of visiting about 46 countries plus Antarctica, which, as you know, is not a country. About half of those probably for work, and the half just because I really got the travel bug in my mid 20s.
Yes or no? Do you feel safe in a car powered and driven by AI?
Do I feel safe in an autonomous, self-driven car?
Yeah.
I haven't been in one yet. I know, and that's a really hard question to answer. One thing's for sure, though, the hype, especially by certain car companies that are working on self-driving, is over the top. We're 2 years away from self-driving. No, for fully autonomous, prevalent driving, we are 30 years away. It's very
Yeah.
important and it's happening, but the overhype is very the mismanagement of expectations, super disconcerting. Super disconcerting.
Yeah. I think one of the, if not the largest, Tesla said 2 years ago that we would have 1 million autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars on the road.
Oh no,
Um,
I think he said that many more than 2 years ago. He's been saying that for a long time.
okay. What's the last question you asked Chat GPT?
Oh, oof. The last question it was several weeks ago. At one point I had it write some funny poem about, oh, I don't have a good answer for this one. I had it write a sitcom with the Star Wars characters. That was pretty good.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would probably be picked up by one of the streaming platforms.
Yeah, I'm gonna cash in on that. Yeah.
I think it's a tradition. Whenever we land at Star Wars, that's a good point of departure to finish up our episode. I mean, we covered Spider-Man, Voltaire, and Star Wars, all within
Yeah.
the framework of predictive analytics, machine
right.
learning, and how to best utilize it in today's modern world for business and in life. And, it's a rich, rich conversation. I'd love to go into the future and bring you back. And once the book takes off and launches, and we hear how people are reacting to all the keynotes that you're going to be giving next year and beyond. Thank you for your generosity, being so thoughtful, and giving us some really rich, great insights for us laymen, not the data scientists and analytic people who have a much deeper understanding of all this than you do, Eric. So thank you.
My pleasure, Seth, and I'd love to come back. It was really great being on the show.
All right. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. For those repeat listeners coming back, for the new listeners, thank you for being here for the first time. Share with everybody the Keynote Curators podcast. You can be found on every platform, everywhere. And we will look out for you the next time. We appreciate you spending time with us. We hope you've been smarter for it.